Thank you all for coming. My name is Mark Graves. I'm Suits and Tables CTO and also a founder and CEO of a company called Meyer. So the title of my talk is Maximum Viable Integrity, and I jokingly say I'm going to talk about these things, but I really want to concentrate on what I said at the beginning, which is thank you for being here. I find it really helps me to stand up and talk about things that I struggle with, and really that's the goal of my talks, actually, to get that out and to basically, hopefully provide you a roadmap to learn from my mistakes. And I don't think that I'm the only one that actually makes mistakes. We've probably all seen this. Success for everyone is a path. So not a linear path. We often think about it in terms of a start point and an end point. And in reality, the process is really messy. And for me, what that leads to is a sense of not belonging, not being smart enough, not knowing enough about programming, not knowing enough about data structures, not knowing enough about algorithms, not being smart enough. And I don't think that I'm alone in that either. So what you actually find is this thing called Impostor Syndrome. Now, like, if you look at this is Hacker News, which this is the forum for what is supposedly the absolute best and brightest of, startups in the world, the Y Combinator Startup Accelerator. And this is a real thing that people are dealing with. And what you find is that people walk in and they have no capacity to judge where they're actually at. And that really leads to this sense of not belonging, not being good enough. And I question how much that is reality. And so being the good scientist that I am, I started taking some observations. And what I realized was that I'm not alone, that these are error messages that I get, that I got over just the past couple of weeks. And so the people that made these things were just like us. And that was a really powerful thing for me. It might be blatantly obvious to everyone else, but, perhaps that's just more of the same, cycle of thought. So it's really easy for me to stand up here and say that, but I wanted you to hear it from somebody that you actually might listen to.
Which is
Hold on.
most.
Uh-oh. There we go. Man, bad news.
People don't get those experiences because they never ask. I've never found anybody. No, I've actually always found something to be very true, which is most people don't get those experiences because they never ask. I've never found anybody that didn't want to help me if I asked them for help. I always call them up. I called up, this will date me, but I called up Bill Hewlett when I was 12 years old, and he lived in Palo Alto. His number was still in the phone book. And he answered the phone himself. He said, yes? He said, hi, I'm Steve Jobs. I'm 12 years old. I'm a student in high school, and I want to build a frequency counter. And I was wondering if you had any spare parts I could have. And he laughed, and he gave me the spare parts to build this frequency counter, and he gave me a job that summer in Hewlett-Packard, working on the assembly line, putting nuts and bolts together on frequency counters. He got me a job in the place that built them. And I was in heaven. And I've never found anyone who said no or hung up the phone when I called. I just asked. And when people ask me, I try to be as responsive, to pay that debt of gratitude back. Most people never pick up the phone and call. Most people never ask. And that's what separates sometimes the people that do things from the people that just dream about them. You gotta act. And you've got to be willing to fail. You've got to be willing to crash and burn, with people on the phone, with starting a company, with whatever. If you're afraid of failing, you won't get very far.
So the point of that being, that's a man that I think that it would probably be pretty hard to say was not a success. So I really think that my particular viewpoints might be just a little bit off. So with that, the question is, how do we manage that? And the answer for me, that's all, it's great, but it's all really fluffy, kind of sounds like psychobabble. And we as developers think in terms of bits and bytes, integers, Boolean strings, very concrete things. So what does that really mean? And the answer, from my perspective, has been a system of accountability at a unit level, at a behavior level, and at a system level. And so from that, I'll just kind of move into who I am and how I got here. And what I'd really like to do is share with you how I got to the system of accountability that we have in place at my organization. So just to give you a little bit of introduction, the company is called Suits and Tables, and basically we are an open table for groups. So that's what Cranes called us a couple of months ago, and that's kind of how people have taken a liking to us. But that hasn't always been the case. I met with my founders about a year ago, and when I met them, so I should say, Suits and Tables, basically over the past 4 years, we have developed 4 completely separate applications with 4 different data structures underlying them and completely different methods to access the objects there. Different database backends, different everything. But the one thing that didn't change across all that was our clients' needs. And so the question was really, how do we account for that? How do we keep going and not drive ourselves insane when you have a system of constantly changing requirements? And so I could stand up here and talk about, a lot of different indicators: client growth, geographical growth, capital raises, any other KPIs that would validate me externally. But that's really not what is important. As we saw, one of the most famous people of our generation talking about, everybody crashes and burns. And I think that the most important thing is to talk about those failures and talk about them openly so that we don't recreate those failures in other organizations all over the place. So as I began, success is not a defined endpoint, but rather a journey. And so to that endpoint, I'd like to talk about some of the points in our process. So when I met with Bobby and Sam, the other 2 co-founders of this company, they were very similar to a lot of entrepreneurs that we've come across in our time. And they basically knew exactly what they wanted. And it was somewhere between rainbows and unicorns and changing the world and something that I could do in 5 minutes. Right? Obviously. If you've ever gotten to a client and they come up to you and they're like, man, I know exactly what I want. If you did, then you'd probably already have it done by now, is the answer. And so what they fell into was the most common trap for all founders, and that they were asking the user what they wanted, right? And so that's what we commonly found. So this is Henry Ford, obviously the creator of the automobile, and he says, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. So when I met with Bobby and Sam, I said, what do you want? And they said, we'd really like a system that could send out, we have a system right now that can send out a request for proposal to 1 email address. And they wanted to add 1 email address. And I was like, okay, find that little statement. Okay, sure, guys, this is great, awesome. Well, you know what? Actually, we'd really like to be able to add 3 email addresses. Okay. actually, we don't know how many email addresses we like to add, but we know it's in a range. Okay. Well, we only really want one person, and you can see how this process goes. So what you find is that this starts the journey right here, discovery. So although we're computer programmers and we deal in bits and bytes, we have to learn how to deal with these people, and we have to learn that business people think differently than we do for a really important reason. We are on the technical side, and some of us cross over, which is great, but I find it's really a useful thing. And so that was one of the most important lessons that I had to learn. Secondly, and this goes more into, we're kind of going down a process of entrepreneurship, and we've just done the discovery, and then it's really UI, UX. And so this is a photo of our UI, UX from our original site, and we had a terrible error. I got a phone call, and it was, man, the site is broken. The site is down. We have clients ready to go, and they cannot send RFPs. They can't do it, right? And I'm like, I log on, click, and it's there, and I'm like, I go through my tests, everything's working. I'm like, man, is it Internet Explorer compatibility? So I should explain a little bit more about what we do. So we actually built a system that sends requests to proposals for venues to host clients for group dining. And so to that end, they have to add multiple venues to a single request for proposal, and then they send it out. So, you know, we deal with banks, big banks. They're primarily like our clients. And at big banks, they have old operating systems. I mean, we're talking like Windows XP, right? Right? Like, they're using browsers that are so old, like, I was like, man, this has got to be it. Like, I did some CSS floats, like, man, maybe it was something that I didn't think of, so I'm like going over this. And what I found out was actually that we had the toughest problem ever. User error. So you'll see here, that tab's up in the top right-hand corner. And they just straight didn't see it. They didn't know that it was a clickable tab. It's not beautiful. It's very far from beautiful. It was responsive up until a break point, which I obviously didn't design for. And then we had come on a Bootstrap template initially, and so we had this sliding sidebar that was like LinkedIn style that you could pop out. But we still needed to navigate across 3 different axes, and so we couldn't do it. So we kind of went back to the drawing board, and this is our UI now. So this is on the test site. And basically what you find is that people expected when they're doing this, you say it's OpenTable for groups. Well, OpenTable is a commodity-based thing. You can go out and you can grab something, right? That's what people think when they're trying to do this. They're not educated in this process in order to, have a structured idea in mind of, I'm going to do step 1, then I'm going to do step 2, then I'm going to do step 3. You have to kind of fight back towards what they want. And what we found was actually an e-commerce experience is exactly what they wanted. Add to cart, add to cart, add to cart, send RFPs. Get a response, book. Whoa, all of a sudden, everything starts going. It was amazing. So that kind of goes into the second piece, which is, we've done discovery, user interface and user experience, which is kind of a constantly evolving process. And what we found is we can't solve everyone's problems, right? You have to at some point say, sorry, that's user error. We were still, up until a few days ago, we were still getting emails from people, man, your site's broken, I can't get in. And you walk them through the forgot password screen, and we find that our site is actually working as I intended it to. But unfortunately, we haven't been able to call their attention enough to actually help them to forget their password. So yet another failure, but at what, do I want to create a big flashing forgot password button? Probably not, right? So don't try and solve everyone's problems was kind of the lesson I learned there. Then we've got unit testing. So to give you a concrete example, initially when we launched the site, we weren't getting too much traffic. And so we assumed all of our users were going to be really good. They were going to be good users. They were going to use our system as intended. And what we found was that is not exactly the case. So I woke up to one morning, and we had gotten a couple of requests for proposals sent through from an email address that was unverified, because we really wanted to minimize the amount of barrier that someone had to overcome in order to actually request proposals. Because we'd made the user experience so difficult on our first application that for this application, we chose to really narrow that down and make it basically so that you actually didn't have to validate your password, or your email was actually owned by you before you actually sent it out. And so what I found there was that that business needs change over the course of time. And so when you're writing tests, you want your unit tests, your individual unit tests, to be as flexible as possible. Sounds pretty, intuitive, but I figured I'd give you a couple of examples. So that was the bad, and then we've got some code here that you can look at. And so for this, just gonna open the floor. Can anybody, and if you say everything is wrong, I'm going to tell you you're right, but that's not cool. So can somebody just point out something that's bad, or what might be bad about a unit test? A unit test is the smallest level of testing. You want to make sure a functional unit of your system is working. What might be bad about this? Hard-coded URL, number one. Difficult. Then instead of saying that I'm getting an item, I'm actually using, so this is Selenium. I use Selenium to actually do my unit testing, as dumb as that was. I was going through and actually loading up the browser and then parsing the DOM for elements and clicking them in order to actually get it. And what I found was that you have to really break it down to a much smaller level, right? I'm testing getting a venue cart. What am I going to get back given I have a session that is in a current state and a database that is in a current state? Breaking it down to one very specific level and then being able to test that, isolating our sources of unknowns. So beyond that, we'll get to behavior testing. So we've done an individual unit. So then the next question is, how does a unit work together with another unit in order to be a functional or behavioral test for part of your application? And for this, this is another example of, well, this is another example of basically having to understand that your requirements are going to expand with your business. So first, we have this very same example with a hard-coded URL, and then next you actually can't see because it's more lines of code, but you've actually abstracted it out. And so the real lesson learned, again, in a very similar fashion, was just that you have to be flexible with your code as your business requirements change. So then the last kind of testing that I'd like to talk about is a system level test. So there's two big things here that we really found. So first off, when we were first deploying our system, we weren't sure exactly who our clientele base was going to be. We wanted to be everything to everybody. We were sure that everybody was going to find our product amazing, and it was going to be the most amazing product in the world and would replace everything that they ever needed, of course. But as you find, you have to do things and you have to do them very well. And so we found that the banks were going to be our, probably our best customer, and banks like to control their information. So when you're going in to design a system, you actually have to design a system that a bank can implement in an enterprise fashion on site. And so when we were actually choosing our database, we had to choose between Postgres and Google's NoSQL engine. And so what I realized was that you actually have a lot of trouble exporting the data from Google application engine, and Postgres is completely portable. So that was a good thing. But the lesser kind of, or the lesson that I learned actually was more in designing a flexible system. So when we were working, there got to be a point where I needed help. I couldn't do everything on my own, and so I had another few developers that came on and attempted to help me out. I'm a fairly normal dude. I use source control pretty much like everybody else, mercurial, and I was sure that everything was going to be just fine. And unfortunately, what I found is there's actually a process to working in a team with developers to ensure that your code is smoothly integrated across things. And so what we learned from that was that actually you have to teach people the process that you are comfortable with. And that people, the question is, how do you assess that? How do you assess that somebody is going to be good at your process or work well with you? And the answer, unfortunately, I don't really have a good slide for this, is actually that if you look at large corporations like Netflix and Google, what they actually do when they're vetting employees is they have a continuous integration environment, and they pull you in and you write tests, and on the first day that you write code, you can be pushing code to a production server. Well, I was sitting there biting my nails every time I had somebody else help me with a project, because I couldn't tell if just because they sent a pull request, I was going to have to either review every line of code or run a continuous integration suite that at that point took 10 minutes to run. So it was not really, it was 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, and neither one was going to work. So what you find is that at a system level, again, you have to be willing to be flexible and learn from the people around you. So actually what I did was I created an open source project to help other people learn about behavior-driven development, test-driven development, and technologies used in this. So it is located online on Bitbucket at /Mark Graves, and there's a number of URLs there with some of the repositories that I've started to create. And basically, if you've ever seen the Cohen's project, they attempt to take a very similar approach where you walk through from the low level at a unit test to what is a unit test, how do you use a library written in Python in order to run unit tests. So for our organization, we've chosen PyTest. There's plenty of good ones out there. And we use, on top of that, a plugin to PyTest called PyTest BDD in order to do what's called behavior-driven development. So you test your units, then you test your behaviors with the same library, and then actually at a continuous integration level, you can do that as well, because you write your tests to run, and all you need is an actual Jenkins file or a Travis file in order to get your whole system to run. So with that, I'd like to just real quick talk about what is the final phase and the most important phase, which is actually self-assessment. And it's the thing that we struggled with the most. We always were doing things on demand. Everything had to be right now, and we would always improve our process the next time. And what we found was actually that if you don't self-assess and you don't take a moment to step back and appreciate your failures and truly appreciate the journey of entrepreneurship, then you're not going to improve. Because that was actually when we saw the sharpest rise to success, was when we finally started taking the time to work on our process as a team. So in short, entrepreneurship is tough, software development is tough, but there are systems that we can put in place to be accountable to ourselves and to our organizations in order to be more efficient and to succeed in the journey and in getting better in the journey every single day. So thank you very much for your time.